It's mobilizing thousands of service members to help out with the pandemic response. In total, 24,000 members of the military now stand ready to respond to calls from provinces and northern communities if they come in. Harjit Sajjan is the Minister of National Defence. Hi, Minister Sajjan. Thanks very much for making time for us.
You're welcome.
Minister, you said earlier today that forces were being sequestered to prepare for the possibility of deployment to help with the fight of against the spread of COVID-19. What does sequestered mean specifically?
Well, this is unprecedented times. What we're doing is making sure that we have the appropriate plans in place to be able to respond to Canadians' needs. And given that we have responded to floods and fires before, we had to make sure that we built upon the immediate response units that we already have in place so that we can respond to the needs of Canadians across the country with specific emphasis up in the north and the Arctic. And what we're doing is making sure that we have regular force units that are ready to respond, which also includes the reserves. And we have called up many reservists who are wanting to be on a full-time contract for this response will get a contract, and that's exactly what we're doing. And this will give us the ability to be able to respond into communities all across the country.
But what, Minister, does sequestered mean? Does it mean that they're in isolation, that they're not with their families? Like, what exactly does it mean?
No, exactly. Well, we said it early on, we made sure that our forces were needed to stay healthy. So we started taking physical distancing measures very early on and sending people home to work from home. Only essential staff were at bases or offices, including here in Ottawa. So what we're saying is have the force ready. Majority of the force will be remaining at home as needed, but be able to respond as quickly as possible. But they need to remain healthy for us to do so.
So they're just complying with physical distancing rules and that are out there already, is what you're saying?
Well, yes, and we're taking probably a little bit more greater measures just because we need to be ready to respond. And so we're making sure that, for example, in terms of when it comes to our air crew or our ships on East Coast, we're going to be sending a few ships out, that making sure that everybody on that ship have been cleared. And what that allow us to do is put those ships out and to be able to respond to any possible emergency situation to a coastal community. So those are some of the extra measures we're taking.
So you mean you'd put some ships out with people who are, for sure, are not ill?
Yes, absolutely. And so we're taking extra measures. The Surgeon General has been working very hard on this problem, and also very closely connected with the federal health officials to making sure that not only that we're ready, but as we start looking at the type of response that we provide, whether it's direct logistical supports or even responding to floods in a COVID-19 environment, what do we need to do differently? So that's what we're doing on a very detailed level. And I trust in our leadership that we have all the ability to meet this task as we have done in the past.
I want to follow up just on the last point that you made, and that is that the forces are going to be ready to help, whether it be with the fires, potential flooding, but also fighting the spread of COVID-19. Are you drawing back resources in other areas in order to prepare for those potential deployments?
We have always had a system in place to respond. As you recall, when it comes to our floods and fire response, we have immediate response units that are designated across the country, ready to respond within 8, 12, and 24 hours, and we've done that in the past. And so what we've done here is built on that plan of activating all the reservists who are wanting to be on a full-time contract, making sure that we have enough resources from the Air Force to be able to provide the air logistical support, having specialized units ready to go, like the disaster systems response team, our medical units, and the list goes on. So we do have a wide variety of ability to respond, but that's what's needed right now. Is we don't know exactly what the request might be, and we're hoping that we don't need to respond because with the prevention measures. But we need to be prepared if we're called upon that we will be ready to respond to anywhere in the country.
I just want to be clear on the resources issue, and I'll tell you why I'm asking. I remember in both 2018 and 2019, there was an increase in natural disasters in this country that the military had to respond to. And General Vance at the time gave a few interviews, including one with us, in which he laid out that the demands of responding to these disasters required an increase in recruitment. So there's already an issue in the resources available and the sort of increase in natural disasters. Now we add to all of that COVID-19. Is the solution, the specific solution where resources are concerned from your perspective, allowing reservists, offering them full-time contracts? Is that the solution that you're proposing here?
No, so first of all, when we launched our defense policy, we went through the analysis, what is the composition of the force that's required. And based on the information and the challenges that we had at that time, we increased the size of the reserves and the regular force, and we have increased our recruiting. And numbers have been increasing. But when you look at this very unprecedented environment, we will be looking at future needs as well. But when it comes to the current response, keep in mind that's what the reserves are there for, are ready to respond to any type of emergencies. We do have the regular force ready to respond. Yes, we have to make some changes inside the Canadian Armed Force, just like every other company and governments within Canada, where we're not going to be doing training. We have to follow all the health guidelines as well. And that's allowing us to do is making sure that we have a greater force available to respond.
Recruitment is up, but it's not meeting targets. I again want to be specific. Are you going to be withdrawing any troops currently deployed on international missions to come back and help with a domestic response here, or will those missions remain as is?
So all of the international missions that we have are currently ongoing. When I mean they're ineffective, we're able to carry out those missions. However, in a COVID-19 environment that other nations are facing, that things have changed. For example, in Ukraine, obviously we're not conducting capacity building training right now because this is not the smart thing to do. So as we're not having Ukrainian armed forces members to come, our forces are not needed to train. So we're keeping some of that force back in Canada. When situation change, we'll go back in. And given that the security situation in Iraq has changed, and training is also not going on with the same intensity. So what we're doing is making the adjustments that are needed.
What are those adjustments? Well, could you just be specific for Canadians watching tonight? Like, is 10% of those normally deployed in Eastern Europe, 10% in Iraq? What is the specifics around that?
I mean, I have the numbers, but when it comes for operational reasons, we're not giving out all the numbers. We are making adjustments because in addition to the security environment, but these troops are not coming back as a result of needed for the COVID-19 response. This is a result of dealing with a COVID-19 situation on the ground, right, but also some of the security dynamics that we have been dealing with for some time now that started early in January. But one thing I can tell you, the response capability that we have is based on everything that we have inside Canada. We're having to make adjustments, but those adjustments are absolutely necessary because of the COVID-19 environment that we have, and every nation is doing just that. But one thing I can assure you, we're very mindful of the missions that we're conducting with our allies, and we're monitoring all the security threats, and we're very mindful of any potential adversaries who might want to try to take advantage of the current situation.
What adversaries are those?
We have to look at, even though we have defeated Daesh on the ground when it comes to their territory, but we know that there have been resurgence of things. We need to make sure that they're not taking advantage of this situation, not sending misinformation out. So I'm not going to get into the details of it because obviously that is a intelligence matter, but I can assure you that we're looking at all the measures to making sure that those missions are carried out and that we keep the international security in mind as we move forward. And I consult with my colleagues on a regular basis on this.
Before I let you go, Minister, you mentioned earlier today that you spoke with your counterpart in the United States, Secretary Esper. In those conversations, can you provide Canadians with an update on the proposal the United States had to send troops to the border? The Wall Street Journal reported last week that proposal was off the table. Has your counterpart, Secretary Esper, conveyed that to you?
As I think the Deputy Prime Minister has already conveyed that, we've had many discussions with regards to this, and also, more importantly, their response of what they're trying to do in this pandemic environment. And what we also talked about is how we can make sure that we can respond to each of our nations as well, but at the same time, as the situation improves and we have an excess of resources, of how we're going to be able to support one another. Because when it comes to our borders, a virus is not going to be looking at any artificial line on the ground, and we need to be mindful that we need to support one another through this crisis.
With respect, Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister has not confirmed that report from the Wall Street Journal. Has Secretary Esper told you that the proposal is no longer?
I can assure you that I've had many discussions with Secretary Esper on multiple things, including this one as well.
But does that mean that the proposal is still being discussed? Does the United States still want to deploy troops to the Canada-US border?
I'll let the Deputy Prime Minister talk about that.
You don't have an answer for that?
Like I said, I'll have the Deputy Prime Minister talk about that. My focus right now is to making sure that not only the Canadian Armed Forces are ready to respond to Canadians at time of need, but also learn from our international partners, including the U.S. in this case, so that we can be able to take those lessons and respond more effectively for our nations.
All right, Minister, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much. When it comes to historically, the Canadian Armed Forces have always been there at time of need. I can assure you that this is an unprecedented time. We haven't been in this type of crisis before, but the Canadian Armed Forces, with the whole of government approach, will be able to respond to this.
The Canadian Armed Forces have been put on notice. Be prepared to respond to calls for help from provinces and communities as the COVID-19 crisis deepens. Today, Chief of Defence Staff General Jonathan Vance, as well as Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan, said 24,000 Armed Forces members are ready to be deployed. These rapid response teams would help deliver, for example, medical devices, as well as help support isolated communities. So what exactly can we expect from a response from the Armed Forces to look like? General Tom Lawson is a former Chief of Defence Staff, and Andrew Leslie is a retired Lieutenant General and former Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Affairs. They're both in Ottawa. Hi, General Lawson. Hi, General Leslie. Nice to see you both. Thanks for making time for us.
Be here. Hey, Pashi.
Hi, General Lawson, I'm going to start with you. Today we heard from the Minister of Defence as well as General Vance that the military is essentially at the ready for whatever needs might arise due to the spread of COVID-19. Can you help our viewers understand what role potentially the military could play in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see our troops roaming the streets as we did in the Olympics back in Montreal decades ago. I think it more likely would be a scenario that General Vance was painting, where a province or an area within a province might be undergoing another challenge at exactly the same time as they're trying to deal with COVID. For instance, a flood in the next month or two, as we saw about this time last year, or perhaps fires as we enter the summer period. And this all together can require areas and provinces to ask the military to help out.
When it comes to resources, General Leslie, and the ability to be able to respond to all of what General Lawson laid out, but also continue to take part in missions abroad, albeit reduced ones at this point, they outlined 24,000 as the number today. What does that tell you?
The armed forces themselves, about 100,000 when you do the regulars and the reserves. About a third of those are not suitable to go outside the wire in the context of another time. It's a discussion for later what the size of the armed forces should be in an ever increasingly complicated world. But that's a significant amount of person power to deal with the threats as identified by General Lawson. Key point here, I fully agree, this is not a mission for troops with weapons in the streets. They are the organization of last resort, willing to go into harm's way, risk their lives to protect us, be that fighting floods, forest fires, or backstopping when it gets to the crisis point, probably a couple of weeks away. Our frontline troops, who are the medical responders, the truck drivers delivering the groceries, the pharmacists, and the list goes on.
And what does General Lawson, a backstop in that capacity, mean?
Well, I think what the armed forces has that the province wouldn't have is access to very quick response capabilities provided by aircraft, trucks, muscle provided by well-trained and hardy troops. Those things that they have in some respect, but not in the amounts and capabilities that we see with the Canadian Armed Forces.
General Leslie, you outlined, and actually both of you outlined, how you didn't think it was going to be sort of, this image of, members of the force in the streets. There has been a lot of discussion about whether or not the federal government, and they've said that they're considering invoking the Emergencies Act. Is there a role for the military vis-a-vis that in any capacity, do you think?
There's no role that I see for them to be armed, but there's certainly scope for the federal government to initiate the Emergencies Act, which I frankly think they should have done a couple of weeks ago, because that will provide an overarching framework with which they can prioritize the resources between the provinces and also shift assets around, for example, the production of ventilators to whoever or whenever it's needed most. Vis-a-vis the armed forces, a word of caution. Mm-hmm. This is an organization of last resort, superbly trained, keen to get on with helping Canadians. But if you commit them too early, like any strategic reserve, then they'll be consumed. They'll be stuck in place doing that which they're doing, or they'll get sick. So it's a fine decision-making balance between responding to political imperatives so people can get the comfort of seeing Canadian Armed Forces people in their streets helping. But if you commit them too early, then you won't actually have them available for when the wave actually reaches its crescendo, which is still a couple of weeks away.
Minister Sajjan, General Lawson said today, used the word sequester to describe the members and the reservists who might be called upon. How did you interpret that? As far as their own health goes in all of this, what is your interpretation?
Right. I think the big thing there is anyone back here in Canada can't be allowed to become part of the problem. They have to be ready to be part of the solution. And so largely that means doing what each of us are doing right now, answering the call as required, but in the meantime, staying away from others. Now, meanwhile, as the minister mentioned, we've got troops over in operations. Necessarily, we've got troops near and in Ukraine doing those things that we need to do to stabilize that country. And we've got troops over in Iraq. My own son is there flying Hercs and supplying the bases that need to be supplied as that mission carries on, and that continues apace. So we've got Canadians not only across the country, but also around the world that continue to do what they do. And the leadership is watching very carefully what happens with those missions too, because as COVID enters the countries that our troops are now working in, they want to be very careful that they're not over-challenged with these operations and responding in a personal way to COVID.
How's your son doing?
Oh, he's delighted to be over there. They're doing what they've been well trained to do.
General Leslie, the minister also touched on those missions. And in fact, in the context of saying, this might be a time that our adversaries want to take advantage of. How did you interpret that, General Leslie?
It's always best to err on the side of caution. So don't commit your troops too early, but those that are committed in active operation, be even more vigilant than otherwise. Things are getting unpredictable. They're getting chaotic. And in such circumstances, it's easy for people to either plan aggression and try to carry it out, or for mistakes to happen, inadvertent triggers, which can lead to actually lives being lost in these international missions from hostile action. So without being paranoid, just be cautious, be ready, and I think the armed forces are handling it right.
I have to ask you both before we go about something I talked to the minister about earlier, and we've heard over the past week, this idea that was put forth by the White House about arming or militarizing the border between Canada and the U.S. General Lawson, any thoughts on, it's unclear right now. One newspaper in the United States is reporting that it's kind of off the table, but how significant a change in policy would that be from your perspective?
Well, it's a border unlike any other border in the world, isn't it? Thousands of kilometers that are relatively unguarded, certainly not by any armed forces, and have never been since wars that we fought with our now friends to the south. So it would. I'm not sure it would really signal much of a change if indeed one of the two, and in this case the United States, decided that there was a threat or a concern that they would have to deal with, while Canadians themselves might feel slightly offended and there might be some political capital. The military forces of Canada and the United States are so intertwined, so carefully joined in training for the Army, Navy, the Air Force, Special Operations, that I don't really think it would have much effect. It would be done for a political effect, and I really don't think it would have much effect in the long run.
General Leslie, your thoughts?
This was, I believe, a political act by the president, and I think the prime minister handled it absolutely right. No in-between people, no ministers calling. He picked up the phone, he spoke to President Trump, and the issue's gone away.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I really want to thank both of you for your insights this evening, and I wish you both the best of health.
Pleasure, Betsy. Thanks.
And you.
Thanks to General Lawson and General Leslie. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.